good? Okay. All right. Thank you all and welcome today. Thank you, Just Majority, for having me, for bringing together this great group of legislators. I think we have city council members. And thank you for bringing a beautiful bus and touring it around to raise awareness and talk about what is a really important issue. And I just want to say we did a bus tour last year, and they're no joke. They're not easy at all. So also thank you to everyone that's actually putting all of those logistics together. I am Jody Hicks, President and CEO of Planned Parenthood Affiliates of California, representing 7 affiliates throughout the state. And as you may have heard, on Sunday, our Planned Parenthood National announced its support for the expansion of the Supreme Court and term limits as a part of court reform. And just this morning in D.C., our Planned Parenthood Federation announced its endorsement of the Judiciary Act, a bill that will increase the number of justices on the court from 9 to 13, and it's being reintroduced in both chambers of Congress today. And I want to be really clear. The fight to strengthen our democracy, to bolster our institutions, has always been intertwined with the fight for reproductive freedom. Our courts are supposed to be a backstop to protect our civil rights. And we have and continue to face unrelenting attacks on our basic freedoms. And the courts have been used instead as a vehicle to advance a dangerous agenda against abortion rights, voting rights, LGBTQ rights, so much more, against our very democracy. And since Roe v. Wade has been overturned, it's been almost a year ago, numerous states, as we knew they would, have banned or restricted access to abortion, and even more are continuing to follow suit. And the impacts are very real. Just today, UC San Francisco study was released showing that healthcare providers have seen increased morbidity, exacerbated pregnancy complications, an inability to provide time-sensitive care, increased delays in obtaining care for patients in states with those abortion bans. And these stories continue to paint a stark picture of a post-Roe clinical landscape, detailing harm not only to patients, but also to healthcare providers who are now being forced to follow medically unnecessary laws, negatively impacting their patients' health, putting them all at risk, and deepening inequities in our healthcare system. And we know that these justices are not content to simply overturn Roe. In recent years, the courts have been stacked with judges and justices who are extreme in their opposition to abortion and writing to ignore decades of settled precedent, as well as science, medical evidence, and strip people of their constitutional and civil rights. So it's critical that changes be made to rebalance the courts and establish a fair judiciary that protects and defends our rights and advances justice for all people. And I want to be crystal clear that because of systemic racism, discrimination, and other forms of institutional oppression, all of these actions always disproportionately harm Black, Brown, Indigenous, and LGBTQ plus people, immigrants, and people with low incomes. Diversity is what makes California and this nation what it is today. It's what makes us great. Everyone deserves access to care, no matter what. And we don't have time to waste. We need judges that are committed to fairness and equality, to protect our democracy, our rights, the future of our country. Court reform is essential to restore abortion rights, to bolster our hard-won civil rights that have been weakened, and protect other rights that continue to be under attack. Planned Parenthood is committed to working for bold changes to our courts. Our judiciary must work for all of us to protect our rights and freedoms, not take them away. We are proud to work with our democracy, reform, civil rights, reproductive justice partners who have led this work for decades. Planned Parenthood's expanded position is a continuation of our commitment to ensure that everyone, no matter where they live, has the freedom to make decisions about their own bodies, about their lives, and about their very futures. So thank you again for this. I'm proud next to introduce who has been a great partner in crime on fighting for freedom, Senator Scott Wiener.
Thank you. Thank you, Jody, and thank you to Planned Parenthood for all of your amazing work. You know, I'll be honest, probably not that long ago, I would have, if you had asked me if I would be at this press conference, I would have said absolutely not. I am before I was elected to office, I was a practicing attorney for about 15 years. I litigated cases from the state and federal trial courts all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and I'm someone who I've always held our judiciary in incredibly high esteem. And so not that long ago, I would have been horrified by the idea of changing the number of justices on the court. But unfortunately, I now believe strongly that that's exactly what we have to do because the United States Supreme Court has transitioned and is transitioning from a legal body to a political body, and it pains me to say that. And it's not even just recent. We saw back in the year 2000 when the United States Supreme Court stole the presidential election by stopping the vote recount in Florida, and did it by issuing an opinion that was so incoherent that the court literally said that no one should ever cite that decision for precedent for anything else. That's the definition of bad judging, to say we're going to issue an opinion that you can never cite as precedent for anything else. We then saw the United States Senate under the leadership of Mitch McConnell steal a Supreme Court seat by refusing to consider the nomination of Merrick Garland. We then saw Mitch McConnell again ram through Amy Coney Bryant after Donald Trump had been defeated for re-election. And so they have worked very hard to hyper-politicize this court. And now we have a court that not only has overturned Roe v. Wade, but threatens to overturn civil rights statutes, protecting the LGBTQ community and other communities, and we are all bracing for that. This is a court that has become increasingly politicized, and I'm deeply concerned that we will see another stolen presidential election with the aiding and abetting of this court. There is nothing magical about 9 justices. Throughout history, the number of justices on the court has changed. Congress has the authority to do that. No one questions that Congress by statute can change the number of justices. The 3 branches of government all interplay with checks and balances, and Congress has certain checks on the judiciary. Congress can set the number of judges in the lower courts, the number of circuits, the number of district courts, and the number of justices on the Supreme Court. And it is time to do that, and that is essential for maintaining a healthy democracy. So with that, I would like to now turn it over to my great colleague from the Assembly, Assemblymember Miguel Santiago.
I want to thank everybody who's here, particularly Justice Majority. And here's why. Never in our lifetime would we take a look at the Supreme Court and say that the system is broken. The highest law of the land, the law that is supposed to be the fairest in the world, has now broken. And we take a look at what it's done. Affirmative action, one of the things before the courts. The outcome, I'm not too confident about. LGBTQ rights, we're not going to be confident about the decisions they're going to make. Reproductive rights, they've already taken us back generations. We can't be confident about what's on their table. When we take a look at gun control, I never in a million years would have imagined that the Supreme Court would rule the way it's ruling today on gun control. Democracy and elections. It's been said by my colleague, and we can't imagine what's ahead of us. Impossible to believe the Supreme Court, nominated by Trump, will then in the future select to be fair about in elections. Immigration. We've seen what it's already done. We've seen what it's hinted at, and we've seen what's on the table today. Never in a million years would I have thought that we'd be standing here. And I, like my colleague, if this had been a decade ago, 2 decades ago, probably wouldn't have thought it was right to do an increase. But today, because of the decisions that are being made, there is a mandate to make a decision that increases the Supreme Court and brings us back to just laws, brings us back to decisions that are fair. No other time in history is it more important today to increase the number of Supreme Court justices, because the decisions that they are making are not just and the system is broken. Today across the country, people are suffering. While we have somebody on the Supreme Court who's taking junkets by billionaires. I never thought that we'd be able to say that, but we say that today. Today, people are suffering across the country, and we see a Supreme Court that is now moving us backwards generations. The law of the land, the highest law of the land, the fairest justices that we should have seen for a country, the fairest justices that we should have seen for the world, are now taking us back. We've got to put a stop to that. Let's be honest about that. We need to balance the Supreme Court in a way that is going to be fair, that is going to be ethical, and is going to be just, and set a standard for the world, set a standard for the country. And we're not seeing that today. But let's just be crystal clear about what's going on today and why we need this change. We mentioned a number of things that are before the Supreme Court. But the overturning of Roe versus Wade is unconscionable in any time in history, let alone today, when even red states support, when even blue states have always supported. We have got to do something, and we've got to do it now. We've got to start that national movement so that whether you are Republican or whether you are Democrat or whether you are independent, there should be support for this, because what we're seeing is something unjust in the highest law of the land. And for those reasons, we got to do this, and we've got to do it today and now. And now it's my pleasure, and I'm going to get a little out of order here, if it's okay, that I introduce my colleague, council member here from Sacramento.
Good afternoon, everybody. Let's give a round of applause to Assembly Member Miguel Santiago. Santiago here. Eric Guerra here, Vice Mayor for the City of Sacramento. And on behalf of the City of Sacramento, I want to say welcome to Just Majority in the bus tour. Let's give Just Majority a big round of applause for making it out here in this bus tour. And we encourage them to go to every other city. We are here with my colleagues on the City Council, welcoming them to Sacramento. Bienvenidos. 3 blocks from here, where I became sworn as a U.S. naturalized citizen. This is vital to me, to many here, because the Constitution and the values that people are concerned about are at risk. The rights that people are afforded to them by the Constitution are at risk. And we've seen that this court has been appointed by Donald Trump and has created the worst approval rating in our country. And because of that, we need to make sure that we have this court reform. So on behalf of the City of Sacramento, I want to echo the issues. We are a city of immigrants. Immigrant rights are a concern. We are a city that protects reproductive rights, and we pass those reforms. Those are a concern. And if we don't have this reform here, every other city will suffer. We will continue to send things to the Supreme Court, but we need a just Supreme Court that's going to fight for the people and not for those who have special interests, as we've seen with some of the members on the Supreme Court. We can do it. Si se puede. Thank you, Just Majority. And we're asking for everyone to support it on behalf of the City of Sacramento. Thank you very much. Let me bring up here Assembly Member, I think it's Reggie Joint Sawyer, Assembly Member Reggie Joint Sawyer here, and back on track. Thank you, Assembly Member.
Thank you, Councilman. Good morning. I'm Assembly Member Reggie Jones Sawyer, and I'm here to discuss why it's crucial to restore balance to the Supreme Court. As a result of severe allegations of financial entanglement with those seeking to influence Supreme Court decisions, the time has come to consider judicial reform in the form of court expansion. Our Supreme Court, where justices serve lifetime appointments, must be free from ethical scandals and alleged acts of fraud. The court has led the way in tremendous gains for all, including reproductive rights and marriage equality. The Supreme Court has recognized the right to privacy that underpins access to safe and legal abortions, allows for interracial marriage, and allows individuals to marry that person they love, regardless of gender. We need a court that protects these rights, not one that inserts government into decisions between a woman and her doctor, not one that discriminates on the basis of race and ethnicity, and certainly not one that had opinions on who qualifies for marriage. This threat is real. The court overturned Roe versus Wade just this last year. I'm reminded of the quote from Martin Luther King Jr. He who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as he who helps perpetuate it. He who accepts evil without protecting against it is really cooperating with it. I refuse to sit idly by as fundamental rights are overturned by increasingly partisan Supreme Court. This gradual overturn is decades in the making, and it is time for progressives and believers in a fair, free, and equal society to fight back. I support the expansion of the court to wrestle control back from those who would turn back the clock to darker times in our history. I call on our congressional leaders to expand the court and to protect our hard-fought freedoms. Thank you. And now bring up, if I can find it, my colleague from the Assembly and Public Safety, Councilmember Mia Bonta. Assemblymember Mia Bonta.
Good morning. Might have turned that off.
Test, test.
Good morning. I'm Assemblymember Mia Bonta, and I have the distinct honor to represent the people of Oakland, Alameda, and Emeryville in the state legislature in AD 18. And I want to thank you all for joining us today and creating the space to be able to talk about this U.S. Supreme Court, because we have witnessed a major erosion of trust and of faith in our highest court of the land. Now, instead of having trust in our highest court of the nation, to uphold and respect laws, which we've been the law of the land for decades, we expect these decisions to be methodically overturned. The justices on the Supreme Court are overturning fundamental rights. The Dobbs decision is a perfect example of this. That decision eliminated our fundamental right to abortion, a right women and birthing people have had for nearly 50 years. What we are seeing now, in light of that reckless decision, states like Florida and Georgia have legal 6-week abortion bans. States like Alabama and Oklahoma and Tennessee have legal near total bans on abortion. The Dobbs decision certainly motivated me and members of the Legislative Women's Caucus to pass over 15 pieces of legislation last year to shore up the protections for women and birthing people seeking reproductive care here in California. Because in California, abortion is and will remain a fundamental right. It is enshrined in our state constitution, thankfully. But we still have the U.S. Supreme Court to contend with. And when Maya Angelou said to us, when somebody shows you who they are, believe them. I'm certain that Anita Hill would want us to remember who we got appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. Somebody who is far more willing to put a pubic hair on a Coke can. I'm sure that Christine Blasey Ford, when she spoke out, wanted us to see who we were appointing to the Supreme Court. Somebody who liked beer. In this moment right now, we need the highest court of our land to protect our basic fundamental rights. And we no longer have assurances that that will happen, because we've already seen who they are. And so right now we must take action to be able to expand the court and provide term limits that will allow us to be able to have a functioning democracy. Democracy, this experiment of democracy, is entirely dependent on an ethical, fair, and just Supreme Court. People in the Supreme Court are beyond reproach. They must be beyond reproach. And unfortunately, there is more reproach to give than we can at this moment. So with that, we must stand strong, make sure that we are bringing back safety in our democracy, bringing back certainty in our court system, in our federal court system, in the highest courts of the land, by demanding that we have democracy enshrined through a just court. So thank you. And I will now announce City Council Member Katie Maple.
Thank you, and very pleased to be here with Just Majority. My name is Katie Maple, and I proudly represent the 5th District in the city of Sacramento. The communities I serve are beautiful and diverse, but they're also overwhelmingly low income and under-resourced. While hardworking residents in my district struggle to put food on the table for their families and pay rent, certain Supreme Court justices are jet-setting around the world with their billionaire buddies. When I walk around our neighborhoods, the exhaustion is palpable. People are tired of struggling while a small number of people in power continue to fail them. What I hear most often is, what's the point? The unethical behavior of a few erodes what little belief we have left in our system. So if we cannot trust the highest court in the land to adhere to basic ethical principles, how will we ever rebuild what already feels broken and divided? A small number of people on the Supreme Court are failing our workers, they are failing women, they are failing Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, and they are failing the elderly. I'll let you do the math on who's left for them to work for. So let's do some addition. We're fighting to add members to the court, to add perspective, to add accountability, and to add justice. You might hear some say that such a thing is unheard of, but those who study history know that is wrong. We know that, in fact, the number of Supreme Court justices has changed 6 times since its inception. We must be nimble and willing to make changes to accommodate the modern world that we live in. In a time when the fundamental rights of women, our trans siblings, immigrants, and communities of color are at risk, we cannot wait to see if the current Supreme Court will do the right thing. We need a more fair, just, and equitable court that will serve everyone and not just some. So it is now my honor to introduce Assemblymember Matt Haney. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to my colleagues and to Just Majority for your leadership. I know that this is a very, very tough task, but it's an essential one. The work that we're doing here in this building to make sure that our democracy works for everyone, that we can protect the fundamental and essential civil rights of all of our constituents, that we can pass laws that uplift every resident and their needs. All of that is put at risk if we do not take on this challenge of an ethical and democratic and responsive Supreme Court. Even if we weren't talking about the current members of the U.S. Supreme Court, this is a court that needs to change. To have a court that lacks the basic ethical principles and standards is unacceptable. To have a court where people can serve for 40, 50, 60 years with no recourse, even when they break the law or those ethical standards, is unacceptable. To have a court that only has 9 members when the amount of work that comes to the Supreme Court is expanding rapidly all the time. So the court needs to be modernized. It needs to be made more responsive to our majority, even before we talk about the members who are on the court itself. But when you look at this Supreme Court and how it has flagrantly violated the rights and the precedent of those protections and those rights, when it has gone against precedent that has protected our residents for decades and decades, when it has clearly served a different set of interests sometimes clearly connected to ethical lapses rather than serving the people of our nation, it's time for a change. So we can't accept this Supreme Court to continue with its business as usual, overturning fundamental civil rights and civil liberties, and doing so with such flagrant disregard for ethical principles. But there's a solution. The way forward is to democratize the court, to expand the court, to have clear ethical standards on this court. And if we do that, our residents will be better protected, and the work of our democracy will have a much brighter future. With that, I am introducing, who am I introducing? Okay.
Unless anybody wants to talk again. Thank you, everyone. I think this is the part where we can answer questions. Mhm. Hi. Yeah, I mean, I can start. I think we can't predict what will happen in the future, but we certainly know what's happening right now, and it's not acceptable. And we're watching people be harmed in real time, knowing, and they've opened the door for what's coming next and what those decisions will be. And so I think, as everybody has spoke to, we cannot sit by and watch while real people are really getting hurt as we know it. And so I think that's the position that Planned Parenthood is taking, is we know what's happening right now. We know, let's not forget, there's been some real unethical behavior by the sitting Supreme Court justices, but it's also not lost, and I think a lot of us here, that the decisions that they're making, they're going back to laws that would have been at a time that I wouldn't be standing in front of you today and being able to speak freely as I am right now and do the work that I'm doing. And so we have to do what we have to do right now to really stop the harm that's happening for people. I don't know if anybody else.
Hi, it's hard to look from Occupy Democrats. People in America don't pay enough attention to the Supreme Court and what's happening. What would you tell people about the Supreme Court, why it's important to pay attention at the local and state level and not just the federal level?
I mean, I think Roe v. Wade, but also the decisions that are happening even as a result to that. We know of that. We know that they're going further and further than even what they said that they would do. We know that they're judge shopping in places like a county in Texas to get some decisions that affect not just red states, but reach into states like California that's doing everything we can to protect citizens and Californians here. But there's only so much we can do if you can judge shop for judges in a small town that can make decisions that affect everyone. And so I think folks are paying attention. So I'm glad that there's a bus, but I think folks are paying attention, and you can see the rage that has happened since Roe v. Wade's been overturned, but also the coming decisions that are going to happen after that. I mean, I think that we're hoping that in coupling that with also processes that are ethical and fair, that there will be a process for judges to come on that go through a stricter process and also adhere to ethics that they currently aren't adhering to. I feel like
The national spokesperson.